Hello everyone, welcome to Module 10 of the Climate Change course. In this module, you will be introduced about the issue of climate change planning, for which you will learn about some related concepts and necessary tools that are needed in climate change planning process. So in general, you will learn about the fundamental concept of climate change planning, role of national and subnational institutions in the climate change planning process, the methodology for climate change planning, as well as the international initiative that support climate change planning. So by the end of this module, you should be able to describe in general about the concept of climate change planning and the importance to integrate it into the national development plan, explain the role of national, subnational, and local institutions in the process of climate change planning, and analyze the main element of recognized climate change planning methodology, as well as identify international initiatives that support climate change planning. So what does climate change planning mean? Basically, climate change planning can mean the integration of adaptation and mitigation action in the existing national planning process, or it can refer to a planning process that are dedicated specifically to climate change adaptation and mitigation, such as the development of national climate policy. The impact of climate change are already experienced worldwide, and each nation needs to plan and implement adequate response measures to combat it. So to the present day, many countries have already integrated climate change adaptation and mitigation in their national development agenda. But in most cases, those adaptation and mitigation response are actually implemented by sectoral institutions and local government, which may result in the overlapping and ineffective action. So as a principle, an effective response measure, whether to adapt or to mitigate climate change, require all spheres of the government to work closely together to make sure that the response measure and action plan are well aligned with the national development direction, for which a proper climate change planning is needed. Because climate change is very complex in nature, response measures to climate change cannot be handled by a single government department alone. It is generally need to be planned and integrated at multiple levels, from national to local level, as well as among different sectors. So in that sense, it requires a good coordination both vertically among different levels of governmental agency and horizontally among different ministry or sector. The coordination among sectors somehow it's not an easy task, given that relevant responsibilities are often fragmented between different sectors and departments. In addition, depending on the political system of each country, variation exists concerning the division of decision authority and also accountability structure. So it is therefore important that climate change planning process are aligned with the specific political system of each country. Ideally, planning for climate change should be integrated in the existing strategy planning process at all levels of the government hierarchy. So this slide presents the entry point to integrate climate change issue into the existing plan, which generally can be made at any level. So for example, at the national and cross-sector ministry level, climate change planning can be integrated in the National Poverty Reduction Plan, National Budget Allocation Process and Review, and also the overall development plan of the country. At the ministry level, it can be incorporated into sector strategy, plan and policy, as well as sectorial budget planning process. Then for the subnational authority, the entry point include decentralized policy, provincial or district plan, and preparation stage for subnational budget. In addition to the need for integration among different government levels and among different sectors, to ensure successful climate change planning, it also requires effective stakeholder engagement in the decision-making process because involvement of stakeholders in the decision-making process can lead to enhanced quality of decision as well as increased buy-in to ensure effective implementation and help to improve coordination, which therefore help to avoid duplication of the effort needs. And in general, stakeholder for climate change planning refer to all agency, organization, and individual that could influence on the decision-making concerned with climate change policy and response measure. They can range from business to trade union, to academic institution, and also to civil society group. Given that climate change planning requires effective participation from multiple stakeholders, it is naturally can be a challenging task. Some common challenges that might arise at any stage of climate change planning process include lack of coordination among different stakeholders, lack of leadership and political support, limited monitoring and evaluation policy, scientific complexity and uncertainty, as well as constraint or economic cost of the climate policy. So in general, lack of coordination among different stakeholders, for example, among various government departments, can lead to duplicate of activity, or in the worst case, can result in the activity that cancel each other. Then, since climate change is a scientifically complex issue, precise data is sometimes missing, especially at the local level. So this lacking in appropriate data set make it very difficult to convince decision maker to determine which action or countermeasure is the most appropriate option. Then another important challenge is climate policy can also be costly, especially in the short term with no easily predictable benefit. This aspect make the prioritization of climate change issue difficult when confronting with the other issue that is more apparent. So from previous section, we have learned about several points, including what are the basic requirements for successful climate change planning, why it requires participation and good coordination, and what can be the challenge for the planning process. So we have seen that planning for climate change requires government departments from all sectors, from the national level to local authority level, to take responsibility and work closely together, and that climate change planning needs to be integrated into the existing policy at different entry points from the national level to local level. So in this section, we will learn about the role of government department at different levels in the climate change planning process. So generally, the decision division or the decision authority and accountability structure can vary from country to country, depending on the political system of each country. So therefore, the role and responsibility of different government departments in climate change planning also vary between countries. So in this lecture, we will only discuss about the general role that are commonly taken by different levels of government department in climate change planning process. So to begin with, let's look at the role of the national institution in the process of climate change planning. Basically, the national government is the top level of decision-making and authorization. It plays an important role in climate change planning through various actions. For instance, the national government decision can influence and strengthen climate response measures by strengthening the legislation and regulation that create incentive or disincentive for the climate change adaptation and mitigation. As an example, the national government can set a price on carbon dioxide emission and set priority budget allocation, as well as the overall policy framework that will operate by the lower level of government. Then, in addition to the what we have discussed earlier, the national institutions are also often the best position to facilitate the coordination between different sectors and other government institutions. For example, if a country wants to introduce a carbon tax, Then this needs to be coordinated with all concerned sectors, including energy, transport, and industrial, agriculture, and etc. In addition, the national institutions are often the best position to facilitate the coordination between different sectors and other government institutions. For example, if a country wants to introduce a carbon tax, then this needs to be coordinated with all concerned sectors, including energy, transport, industry, and other sectors. And for such a case, only the national government institution is capable to make an effective coordination. And last but not least, the national government also capable to manage or enhance the international relations to ensure that the international treaty obligation, especially what concerning climate change, is adhered with the national policy. This slide provides some example area of responsibility of the national level stakeholder in climate change planning. So in general, the national level stakeholders include members of parliament and national institutions, which are part of the central government, as well as private sector, research community, and civil society. So to plan and implement climate change adaptation and mitigation measures, these national level stakeholders need to work closely together. For example, if the parliament is deciding to introduce a flood insurance program, including governmental subsidy for insuring building in the flood-prone coastal region, then the Ministry of Finance needs to allocate sufficient resources for the program in the national budget plan. Then, prior to introducing the program, Member of Parliament may also need to consult with research community to better understand future flood risks in the context of climate change. And they may also need to consult with civil society groups to gather information about the perspective of people who live in the flood-prone area, as well as private insurance company about the practicability of the program. Okay, so let's move on to the role of sectoral institutions in climate change planning. So in general, the sectoral institutions are responsible for planning, implementing, and monitoring the sector-specific adaptation and mitigation action. They can contribute to managing climate change through both a bottom-up and top-down approach. For example, if a country develops a national adaptation plan, the sectoral institutions shall provide the sector experience and priority as the input for the national climate change policy framework, which is a bottom-up approach. Then, on the other hand, once the national adaptation plan is adopted, it must be implemented by all the concerned sectors, which is a top-down approach. Generally, the sectoral stakeholders for climate change planning include Line Ministry, Sector-Specific Commission, Parliamentary Committee that focus on sectoral issues, as well as research community, civil society, business association, and labor union. In order to achieve a successful climate change planning, these stakeholders need to work together for the same goal. For example, in case of climate change adaptation in the water resource sector, the Water Ministry plays a central role as it is responsible for formulating policy and setting up various standards, which include the standard for irrigation, equitable access, and productivity. Water Commission can facilitate the transboundary information exchange and cooperation, while Water Management and Planning Board provide technical input into the planning process. And on the other hand, civil society organizations can play a central role in defending the interests of the vulnerable water consumer. Now let's move on to the role of the subnational institution. Subnational institutions for climate change planning include the municipality, city hall, and local authority. The subnational institutions are generally responsible for implementing the policy and regulation that were determined by the central and sectoral institutions. So in terms of climate change planning, local institutions can contribute to adaptation and mitigation response through several mechanisms, which include implementing plan and regulation that's set by higher level of government, For example, the regulation that prevent people from settling in the disaster-prone area, and the regulation that promote low emission and climate-resilient goods and service, such as construction of climate-proof infrastructure and maintaining a healthy forest and so on. So moving on to the methodological approach for climate change planning. Basically, there are a number of methodologies that have been developed to integrate climate change into the development planning at different entry points. But one of the more effective methodology is to prepare a low-emission, climate-resilient development strategy, which is a development strategy that helps to ensure that development planning is taking climate change issue into consideration, or a development strategy that is driven by climate change response. Such a development strategy is very important as it enables the country to employ diverse policy options in a coordinated manner to cope with climate change, and also lead to attract public and private sector to invest more in climate change adaptation and mitigation. This slide presents the key stage in preparing a low-emission, climate-resilient development strategy, which in general can be divided into 5 steps, as you can see here. So the first and foremost action to take in preparing a low-emission, climate-resilient development strategy is to develop a multi-stakeholder climate planning process, which involves the formulation of program steering committee and a good planning process. So as a principle, it is very important to establish a strong and competent team or steering committee that can lead the strategy development work in the first place before starting any action. And to be effective, such a steering committee must compose of key stakeholders such as the high-level officer and the representative from the national, regional, and local sector, as well as the representative from the private sector and academia who can influence decision-making process. Then, after the steering committee have been formulated, a proper process that enables the engagement of all relevant stakeholders into the planning process must be developed. The second stage is after the key stakeholders are engaged in the planning process, climate change profile and associated socio-economic and environmental vulnerability, both under current climate situation and future scenario, should be prepared through various assessment studies. Then the next step is to identify the strategic option that leading to low emission and climate resilient development trajectory. The first step to do this is to determine the emission reduction target and to identify possible options to achieve those targets. Then it is also essential to identify the main sector that contribute to greenhouse gas emission and to plan different low emission development scenarios that are feasible for different sectors. Then after the strategic options are already designed, appropriate policy and financing options that support the implementation of priority climate change action must be identified or developed. The first action to take at this step is to conduct a technical, social feasibility, and cost-benefit analysis of all the available adaptation and mitigation options that are already in the priority list. Then, the barrier that can hinder the implementation of those actions also need to be analyzed along with the existing policy and financing opportunity. Additionally, the investment and financial flow that are required to implement priority action must also be identified at this stage. And the last step is to prepare the strategic roadmap and distribute it to all key stakeholders, including public and private financial sector. Now let's move on to the next topic, which is about the international initiative that serve to support climate change planning. So presently, there are many international initiatives and programs that have been put in place to support climate change planning, especially for the developing country. So in this section, we will try to understand about a few of those existing programs. So first, let's discuss about the low emission capacity building program, which is an international program that financed by the European Union, Germany, and USA. This program is a global initiative that aims at improving national capacity for climate change mitigation by strengthening the technical and institutional capacity, country level, and also by facilitating inclusion and coordination of the public and private sector in the national initiative that address climate change problem. So in general, common action that take under this program include the formulating of low emission development strategy and national appropriate mitigation action, as well as establishing the underlying data collection system, including the national greenhouse gas inventory system and monitoring, and also reporting and verification system. Then there are also the international program that aim at improving the national capacity for climate change adaptation. For example, the National Adaptation Plan Global Support Program, or NAPS-GSP, is a joining program under UNDP and UN Environment, funded by the Global Environment Facility. The main goal of this program is to assist least developed and developing countries in identifying the technical, institutional, and financial need to integrate climate change adaptation into the medium and long-term national planning and financing. So basically, it supports the process to formulate and implement the national adaptation plans. Then the other program that also aim to leverage national capacity for climate change adaptation, particularly for the less developed country, include the Less Developed Country Work Program and the Less Developed Country Expert Groups. Another important international initiative that supports climate change planning is the CCD Plus program, which is a program that seeks to improve the capacity of research and training institutions in the developing country to support climate change adaptation and mitigation action. The activity under this program include development and testing of tools and methods that guide policy and decision-making for climate change adaptation, mitigation, and mainstreaming of climate change response into the National Development Plan. So now we have reached the end of the lecture. And up to this point, I believe you have learned that climate change planning are planning activities that seek to adapt and mitigate climate change, and that to be successful, such a planning needs to be developed in an integrated manner, which require a good coordination and participation of multiple stakeholders, ranging from local to national institutions, civil society, private sector, and also research community. So we can call it a day, and I will see you again in the next module.